Hi there tonight. We step quietly into the dimly lit chambers of one of history's most enigmatic figures. Queen Elizabeth Weber, the Virgin Queen who ruled England for nearly half a century. Imagine yourself stepping through the heavy velvet curtains of her private apartment, the flicker of candlelight casting long shadows over tapestries, and the faint scent of lavender and old parchment hanging in the air. You hear the soft murmur of courtiers beyond the thick wooden door, but inside everything feels heavy, weighted with a strange stillness. This is the final act in a long, dramatic reign. Elizabeth's body is betraying her, and though she was a monarch famed for her iron will, you probably wouldn't survive the toll her years of power stress and mystery took on her. Before you fully sink into your pillow, a quick like and subscribe would mean the world if you're into sleepy stories like this. Got a strange bit of history you want to hear before bed? Drop it in the comments. Wherever you are, I hope tonight brings you rest, comfort, and maybe a curious dream or two. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the Queen's bedchamber, a room both grand and intimate. The air feels thick, not just with the usual warmth of a Tudor castle, but with an indefinable tension. Elizabeth lies resting, her usual sharp eyes closed beneath heavy lids. The rich brocade of her gown brushes softly against the embroidered pillows. Outside, the faint clatter of footsteps, hushed whispers, and the occasional cough remind you that the court waits anxiously beyond these walls. The Queen's face is pale, far paler than the portraits you've seen. Her usually fiery red hair is dulled by illness and shadow. Her breathing, once strong and commanding, is now shallow and uneven. This isn't just exhaustion from ruling a kingdom. It's the slow, creeping collapse of a body worn down by years of stress, secrecy, and perhaps something else entirely. Despite the grandeur, there is a quietness here that speaks volumes. The Queen's attendants fuss quietly, adjusting blankets and bringing herbal concoctions, but even their practiced hands tremble slightly. The faint aroma of crushed mint and rosewater masks, but cannot erase the underlying scent of sickness. You can almost hear the tick of a distant clock, marking time slipping away. Elizabeth's final days are unfolding in this very room, surrounded by people who love her, fear her, and wonder what will come next. This isn't just the death of a queen. It's the end of an era, the close of a chapter that shaped the future of England and the world. Historians still argue whether her death was sudden or a drawn-out decline masked by stoicism and royal ceremony. Some say she met her end like a lioness, proud and defiant. Others believe her body betrayed her quietly over weeks or months. But for now, you watch her breathing slow. The heavy curtains ripple as a cool breeze slips in through the open window. The flickering candlelight dances one last time on the walls as history holds its breath. You watch Elizabeth's fading strength closely now as the days stretch on in a hazy blur of flickering candlelight and whispered concerns. The Queen's symptoms start to reveal themselves quietly, almost teasingly, before becoming impossible to ignore. You notice her growing fatigue, a kind of weariness that no amount of rest can fix. Her vibrant energy, the very thing that once made her the Gloriana of England, has dulled to a fragile flicker. She complains little, but her attendants speak in hushed tones about her recurring fevers, that spike unpredictably sending waves of heat across her pale skin, followed by chills that make her shiver under even the thickest woolen blankets. Her appetite, once royal and indulgent, dwindles until she picks at her meals, eating just enough to keep going. You imagine her nibbling on bland boiled meats or thin bread soaked in broth, the taste barely registering on her tongue. Occasionally you catch glimpses of other troubling signs. Her voice becomes hoarser, sometimes cracking mid-sentence, and a strange weakness settles into her hands. making even the simple task of holding a quill or a cup a challenge. It's almost as if the fierce monarch is slowly retreating into herself, a queen losing command over not just her kingdom, but her own body. One odd detail that tickles your curiosity is the queen's persistent cough. It's not a gentle tickle, but a deep, rattling sound, sometimes accompanied by a faint wheeze. A court physician murmurs that it might be the result of a lingering chest infection, though no one dares say it out loud. After all, admitting the queen is ill in such a way is almost like admitting the impossible, that the mighty Elizabeth could fall like any mortal. Here's a quirky tidbit. You might not expect some court records suggest that Elizabeth was seen spitting blood at times during her final illness. In a culture where signs and omens were taken very seriously, this would have been a terrifying symptom. Blood from the mouth was often linked to tuberculosis or other deadly diseases, or even to poison. Imagine the panic that would have stirred quietly behind those grand palace walls. Another strange note involves her skin accounts mention that it appeared unusually sallow, almost waxy, as if drained of its usual rosy glow. This could be a sign of malnutrition or perhaps an underlying disease causing jaundice, though the exact cause remains shrouded in mystery. Historians still argue whether these symptoms point to a single illness or a combination of health issues exacerbated by decades of stress and questionable treatments. It's possible Elizabeth was suffering from something chronic, a slow decline that was masked by her legendary resilience. You remember that Queen was no stranger to hardship, surviving the tumultuous reigns before her constant political intrigue and the enormous burden of ruling a kingdom during one of England's most turbulent times. This long-term stress, paired with the symptoms you see now, paints a picture of a woman at the edge of her strength, trying desperately to hold on. As you observe, the flickering candlelight casts shadows on her frail figure, and you realize that what you're witnessing isn't just an illness, but the last chapters of a monumental life. The Queen, once fiery and unyielding, is quietly fading into history. You find yourself drawn deeper into the small, dim chamber where Elizabeth spends most of her final days. The air is thick with the mingled scents of herbs, incense, and something less easy to identify. Perhaps the faint metallic tang of old blood or the faintest hint of decay. The room hums with a tense silence, punctuated only by the soft murmur of attendants and the occasional rattle of the Queen's cough. One of the most widely accepted facts is that Elizabeth Verms died on March 24, 1603, at Richmond Palace. The circumstances of her death, however, are far less straightforward than the date might suggest. She had reigned for 44 years, an era marked by flourishing arts, naval victories, and religious turmoil. But now in her final moments, she is a figure of frailty, a queen whose life's vigor seems to have quietly seeped away. A curious detail you might find intriguing is the role of her physicians. Medical knowledge in Elizabeth's time was a strange mix of ancient theory and hopeful superstition. Physicians would often prescribe remedies like bloodletting or herbal concoctions, believing that balancing the body's four humors, blood phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, could restore health. Elizabeth's doctors reportedly bled her multiple times during her illness, a treatment that might have weakened her further rather than helped. Even more peculiarly, some historians point to her diet as a contributing factor. Elizabeth was known to enjoy sweet wines and rich foods, but in her last years, scarcity, stress, or illness may have changed her eating habits drastically. Some suggest that scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin C deficiency, could have played a role given the symptoms of fatigue, swollen gums, and bleeding, which align disturbingly well with some of her reported ailments. Here's an unusual tidbit. Elizabeth was rumored to have been poisoned, a common suspicion, whenever a powerful ruler died unexpectedly in those days. Though there is no solid evidence, whispers in court suggest that some may have sought to hasten her demise to trigger the succession of James Sussex of Scotland. Poisoning was a favored tactic in Tudor courts, often difficult to detect, and historians still argue whether the Queen's death might have been hastened by foul play or simply a tragic natural decline. Adding to the mystery, the Queen reportedly experienced episodes of delirium toward the end, sometimes slipping in and out of consciousness. Some observers described her eyes as glassy, a haunting image that stays with you as you imagine the Queen, battling internal shadows far from her public grandeur. One of the stranger anecdotes involves Elizabeth's behavior in her last days. She refused to see certain courtiers or advisors, possibly mistrusting them or feeling too weak to engage. This withdrawal could reflect a deteriorating mind, perhaps early signs of a stroke or dementia, though such diagnoses are modern interpretations of very limited historical evidence. Historians debate whether her illness was primarily physical or if mental decline also played a significant role. Given the immense pressure she endured and the isolation that comes with supreme power, it's possible her mind suffered as much as her body. As you linger in this quiet room with its flickering shadows, the contrast between the vibrant monarch she once was and the fragile figure she has become is stark. The great Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen who defied expectations and shaped an era, is now simply a woman confronting the inevitable her story, drawing to a close in whispers and fading candlelight. You step quietly into the room where Elizabeth's attendants watch over her, their faces a blend of exhaustion, devotion, and you suspect a touch of dread. The Queen's death wasn't just a private sorrow, it was a turning point for England, a moment that rippled across the country and the world. But what exactly caused this towering figure to finally fall? One of the main historical facts to keep in mind is that Elizabeth's final illness lasted several weeks. Contemporary accounts mention symptoms like persistent cough fatigue, loss of appetite, and swelling, classic signs that today might suggest pneumonia, a respiratory infection that can be deadly even now, let alone in the 17th century. Pneumonia, often called the old man's friend because it could quietly take someone without prolonged suffering, fits the description well. Her cough was so bad that it left her weakened and breathless, and in a world without antibiotics, such an infection was often fatal. But there's more to consider than just the obvious. Here's a quirky detail: Elizabeth was known to suffer from toothaches and other dental problems, which it suggested might have worsened her overall health. Poor dental hygiene was common in the Tudor era, and infections from decaying teeth could spread, causing systemic issues. Some speculate that an untreated dental abscess might have contributed to her fever and declining condition. Another fringe tidbit comes from the strange medical remedies of the time. To soothe Elizabeth's cough, her attendants might have given her herbal infusions made from strange plants or mixed with honey and vinegar. Some herbs used were thought to be magical or symbolic, like henbane or mandrake, which were believed to have healing powers but could also be poisonous in the wrong doses. It's possible that some treatments, while well-intentioned, did more harm than good. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's underlying health conditions played a decisive role in her death. She had battled smallpox earlier in her life, leaving her with scarring and possibly weakened immunity. Chronic illnesses such as arthritis, kidney issues, or even cancer have been suggested by scholars analyzing her symptoms from letters and contemporary reports. Unfortunately, without modern medical records or an autopsy, it's impossible to say for sure. You might find it amusing in a dark sort of way that, despite all the royal pomp, Elizabeth's final days were also marked by a basic human vulnerability. Some of her attendants whispered about her stubbornness, refusing to be seen as weak or dependent, even when her body was failing her. This blend of regal pride and mortal frailty is something that makes her story oddly relatable. One open question scholars debate is the role of stress and mental strain on her health. Elizabeth ruled during turbulent times with threats of invasion, religious conflict, and plots against her life. The mental and emotional toll of such pressures could have exacerbated her physical decline. Some modern interpretations suggest she might have suffered from depression or anxiety conditions unrecognized in her day, but very real nonetheless. And then there's the matter of her nutrition. The Queen's diet reportedly changed as her health worsened, shifting away from the rich food she favored towards simpler fare, possibly because she couldn't keep much down, or because those around her thought a lighter diet would help. Malnutrition or vitamin deficiencies might have contributed to her weakness and slowed recovery. As you picture Elizabeth in her final chamber surrounded by loyal servants weighed down by illness, but still clinging to her dignity, you realize that the story of her death is not just a medical mystery. It's a human story about power, mortality, and the fragile line between life and legend. You settle in closer now, feeling the heavy, almost dusty air of the royal chambers as Elizabeth's health tips further into decline. The Queen's final days weren't just marked by sickness, they were full of subtle signs and the flickers of a fading reign. Moments so delicate, historians have spent centuries trying to piece them together. What exactly happened next? You're about to find out. One crucial historical fact here is that Elizabeth's death is dated to March 24, 1603. That's not just a date on a calendar. It's the end of the Tudor dynasty and the dawn of a new era with James VI of Scotland, ready to take the English throne. The transition wasn't smooth for everyone, but for Elizabeth, this day was the quiet exit from the stage after 45 years of rule. Interestingly, some of the Queen's last words have been recorded or at least whispered down through time. One popular report suggests she said, "All my possessions for a moment of time," which sounds incredibly dramatic. But historians caution that this phrase may be more legend than fact, a poetic invention to capture the tragedy of a great monarch facing death. It's one of those moments where fact and myth blur, creating an image as rich as any tapestry in the palace. Here's a quirky tidbit: Elizabeth was surrounded in her last hours not only by her closest ladies-in-waiting, but also by two physicians who struggled to treat her. They tried remedies typical of the day, including bloodletting and administering concoctions made from plants and minerals. Bloodletting, a favorite medieval and Renaissance cure, was based on the idea that removing bad blood would restore balance. Today we know it often weakened patients further. Imagine being so sick that the doctor thinks bleeding you more might help, like patching a leaky boat by poking holes in it. Another odd detail is that Elizabeth reportedly kept her wits and sharp tongue almost to the end. Despite pain and exhaustion, she was said to make witty remarks and express concern for her kingdom's future. It's hard not to admire the sheer stubbornness and presence of mind, even as the body betrayed her. She was, after all, the Virgin Queen who had navigated countless plots and betrayals. Surely death was just another challenge she faced with her usual resolve. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's final illness was accelerated by poisoning. There's no strong evidence, but conspiracy theories from her enemies, who ranged from political rivals to foreign powers, have long suggested foul play. Some fringe theories propose that her longevity made her enemies desperate enough to resort to assassination. But most scholars find the natural causes explanation far more convincing. You might smile at the thought that in those final days Elizabeth's chamber probably felt less like the grand throne room she once commanded, and more like a quiet, sick room, filled with herbal smells, hushed voices, and the slow ticking of time. The power was slipping away, but the stories about her would grow, becoming legend. A less well-known but fascinating fact is that Elizabeth's death was followed by the exhumation of her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, some years later. Their intertwined fates and rivalries continue to fascinate, reminding us that royal deaths often carry echoes far beyond the moment. So as you imagine the candles flickering low in the royal chamber, the soft rustle of silk, and the faint coughs that signaled the end, you realize Elizabeth's death wasn't just the fall of a queen, it was the close of an age wrapped in mystery and majesty. You find yourself drifting into the atmosphere after Elizabeth's death, where the palace corridors pulse with whispers and the careful choreography of transition. The Queen's passing set off a chain of events that wasn't just political, but intensely personal for those who had lived in her shadow for decades. You can almost hear the rustle of silk skirts and hurried footsteps as courtiers scrambled to secure their futures under the new king. One key historical fact here is that James VI of Scotland, Elizabeth's closest living relative, became James IV of England immediately upon her death. His accession united the crowns of England and Scotland, for the first time marking a monumental shift in British history. The seamlessness of his succession was notable. There was no battle for the throne or civil war, which was quite unusual for the period. But that doesn't mean things were simple behind the scenes. You might find it amusing or unsettling that James, who'd been raised under very different conditions, was immediately greeted with both hope and suspicion by English nobles. His Scottish upbringing made some English courtiers wary, while others saw him as a fresh start. James himself reportedly took great pains to appear more English than Scottish, adopting English customs attire and even language quirks. He once famously said, "No bishop, no king," revealing his firm stance on the divine right of kings and his views on church authority. Historians still argue whether his religious policies ultimately helped or hindered the stability of his reign. Here's a quirky tidbit. To secure his new kingdom, James insisted on a grand coronation that combined traditions from both England and Scotland, including a curious ritual where he was presented with a sword and a scepter symbolizing military and spiritual authority. Apparently the sword was nicknamed Cortana, and legend had it that its tip was blunt, making it the Sword of Mercy. You can almost picture the spectacle, a king with a blunt sword parading through London, reminding everyone he was powerful but merciful. Another fringe but fascinating detail is the rumor that Elizabeth's death was kept secret for a short period to manage the transition smoothly. Courtiers allegedly delayed the announcement to prepare for James's arrival and to ensure no rival faction seized power. Imagine the tension in that palace with everyone whispering behind closed doors, playing a dangerous game of timing and loyalty. There's also the matter of Elizabeth's final resting place. Historians still argue whether burying her in Westminster Abbey alongside her father Henry VIII was a deliberate message of dynastic continuity or simply tradition. Some speculate that the tomb's grandeur was meant to project the enduring strength of the Tudor legacy, even as the Stuart dynasty began. In the meantime, Elizabeth's personal belongings were gathered and inventoried, a trove of jewels, letters, and clothes that spoke volumes about her life and reign. One especially curious item was a miniature portrait, painted on a piece of ivory believed to be a token she gave to a favorite courtier. It's a small but intimate glimpse into her personal relationships, often overshadowed by political intrigue. As you wander these imagined halls filled with anticipation and uncertainty, it's clear that Elizabeth's death wasn't just an ending, but a complex, unfolding story that set the stage for a new chapter in British history. You wake now to the reality of the power vacuum left behind by Elizabeth I, which is not as empty as you might expect. Instead, it's crowded with ambitious nobles, courtiers, and politicians scrambling to secure their own positions in the new regime. Imagine the palace as a living chessboard, pieces shifting under flickering candlelight whispers of loyalty and betrayal, moving faster than the shadows. A main historical fact: Elizabeth left no direct heir, which was a source of immense anxiety throughout her reign. This lack of a clear successor created a simmering tension for decades. When James VI of Scotland stepped forward as the rightful heir, his claim wasn't universally accepted without question. Despite the peaceful transition, factions loyal to different noble houses lingered waiting to see how James would prove himself. One quirky tidbit involves Robert Cecil, the powerful Secretary of State, and a master of court intrigue. Known for his hawk-like demeanor and sharp mind, Cecil was crucial in smoothing the path for James's accession. Some even say he used coded letters and secret meetings to outmaneuver rivals. There's a story about Cecil reportedly sending a message hidden inside a cooked pie, because why wouldn't the first espionage tactics involve baked goods? If true, it's a reminder that espionage isn't just a modern invention, but a time-honored tradition. Another fringe detail is that certain courtiers were rumored to have bribed messengers to delay or speed up news of Elizabeth's death. Imagine the tension as letters passed between towns, the difference of a few hours potentially changing the fate of lives and titles. Historians still argue whether these communications were genuinely manipulated or simply exaggerated stories from eager rumor mills. Meanwhile, you stroll into the world of Elizabeth's closest advisors, who suddenly found themselves recalibrating their loyalties. William Cecil Lord Burghley had been a dominant force, but he died just months before Elizabeth, leaving his son Robert Cecil to carry the mantle. This passing of the torch symbolized the larger shift happening across the realm. In a quirkier vein, there's the story of Elizabeth's old confidant, Sir Francis Walsingham, whose spy network was legendary. After her death, parts of this network reportedly continued to operate but under new management. Some agents supposedly disguised themselves as traveling minstrels or even puppeteers to gather intelligence. It's a reminder that espionage and information control were crucial tools of statecraft, even in a world without phones or the internet. You might also find it fascinating that Elizabeth's courtiers often carried small personal tokens. Lockets, rings, or embroidered handkerchiefs believed to carry good luck or messages of loyalty. These personal artifacts became symbols of shifting alliances as some courtiers offered gift to James's representatives, hoping to secure favor in the new order. The question remains open in scholarly debate. To what extent did the existing Tudor political machinery facilitate a smooth Stuart takeover? And where did the cracks begin to show? Some historians suggest that beneath the polished surface, distrust simmered sowing seeds for later conflicts. As you lean back into this quiet yet electric moment in history, the delicate balance of power feels like a carefully woven tapestry. One thread pulled too hard, and everything might unravel. You find yourself walking through the echoing halls of the new court under James I, the man who was neither English nor particularly loved at first. His arrival marks the beginning of a curious era where old Tudor traditions clash with fresh Stuart ambitions. Picture him stepping into a grand throne room, robes flowing crowned with a weight heavier than any crown might suggest. Historically, James was already King of Scotland for nearly 36 years before he inherited England's throne. This union was unprecedented, two crowns united, but not fully merged, a political experiment filled with promise and peril. You might imagine the murmur among English nobles, some skeptical others, hopeful, all curious about how this outsider would handle English customs and politics. One quirky detail to tickle your mind: James reportedly had a favorite hobby of writing poetry and even dabbling in witch hunts. Yes, this king who now ruled England fancied himself a bit of a literary gent, but he also believed witches were a serious menace, leading to the infamous North Berwick witch trials in Scotland. The juxtaposition is almost comical. Imagine a monarch debating iambic pentameter by day and ordering witch interrogations by night. Historians still argue whether his obsession with witchcraft genuinely reflected widespread fears or served political ends. Another fringe tidbit involves James's peculiar fascination with the divine right of kings. He was a staunch believer in the idea that monarchs ruled by God's will, not the people's consent. This belief would set the stage for later conflicts with Parliament, a brewing storm that you can almost feel crackling in the air like distant thunder. Scholars debate how much this philosophy contributed directly to the English Civil War decades later. Meanwhile, you sense the subtle but significant cultural shifts at court. James brought many Scots with him, including advisors and nobles unfamiliar to the English aristocracy, stirring both resentment and curiosity. Some English courtiers reportedly grumbled about the influx of Scots, and their accents imagined the subtle snobbery in a room filled with perfumed wigs and whispering gossip. One particularly strange curiosity is James's obsession with tobacco, which had recently been introduced to Europe. He famously referred to smoking as a custom loathsome, to the eye hateful, to the nose harmful to the brain. Yet paradoxically, tobacco use spread widely in his court and beyond. You can picture the tension of an early 17th century salon, filled with both criticism and clouds of smoke, a kind of royal irony wrapped in fragrant leaves. You also wander through the royal household's daily routine, a strict dance of etiquette banquets and political maneuvering. Food and feast were not just pleasures, but political tools showcasing wealth and alliances. Some dishes were bizarre to modernize, spiced swan peacock with its feathers reassembled for dramatic effect. Imagine the mingling aromas of cinnamon and roast meats filling grand halls as courtiers jockeyed for the king's attention. Finally, historians still argue about how much James's personality and governance style helped unify England and Scotland or deepen divisions. Was he a visionary king trying to forge peace, or an out-of-touch ruler whose weaknesses set the stage for chaos? You can almost hear the heated debates echoing through the centuries. As you settle deeper into this era, the air thick with political intrigue and cultural shifts, you realize the world of the early 1600s was anything but sleepy. It was a powder keg disguised by velvet and gold. You trudge along the winding corridors of power where whispers of plots and conspiracies cling like the ever-present mist. It's 1605, and the year is about to bring one of the most notorious scandals of early Stuart England, the Gunpowder Plot. You can almost smell the damp stones of the cellars beneath the Palace of Westminster, where fate hangs heavy in the air. The plot, as you might recall, was a bold attempt by a group of Catholic conspirators led by Robert Catesby to blow up King James I and the entire Parliament, erasing the Protestant leadership in one fiery blast. They planned to ignite the gunpowder barrels stashed beneath the House of Lords on the day Parliament opened. Imagine the tension as the plotters painstakingly hoarded explosives, practicing secrecy under the watchful eyes of the kingdom. A mainstream fact here is that the plot was foiled at the last minute, thanks to an anonymous tip, or perhaps an overzealous informant who alerted authorities just before disaster. Guy Fawkes, the man found guarding the gunpowder, became the most famous face of the conspiracy, captured in the act and subjected to brutal interrogation. A quirky tidbit for your drowsy mind. Guy Fawkes wasn't actually the mastermind, but the explosives expert hired to light the fuse. And in the years that followed, his name morphed into a symbol of rebellion, even inspiring the modern Guy Fawkes mask, popularized by hacktivists and protesters worldwide, a legacy no one in 1605 could have predicted. Another fringe note, some historians speculate whether the government might have had a hand in allowing the plot to go far enough to catch conspirators and justify crackdowns on Catholics, a theory still debated. You might find it amusing that November 5th became an annual bonfire night, where effigies of Fawkes are burned, a tradition that blends celebration with a reminder of religious and political tension. Fireworks and sparklers light the night, echoing the explosions that never were. As you watch the fallout, it's clear the plot's failure hardened James's policies against Catholics' escalating persecutions and shaping the religious landscape for decades. The conspirators' gruesome executions, hanging, drawing, and quartering, served as grim public warnings. Yet historians still argue whether the severity of the punishment truly quelled rebellion or merely deepened resentment. Back in the shadows, you ponder the motivations behind the conspirators. Were they fanatical zealots or desperate men caught in the crossfire of faith and power? And what about the secret networks of Catholics, quietly trying to survive under the king's wary eye? These layers of complexity make the gunpowder plot more than just a failed explosion. It's a window into the fragile religious tensions of the age. The echoes of that chilly November night still reverberate, reminding you how close a history sometimes comes to burning itself down, only to be reshaped from the ashes. The air grows colder as you venture deeper into the corridors of history, stepping into the realm of Elizabethan medicine and its role in the final days of the Virgin Queen. Imagine the bustling apothecaries of London shelves, lined with glass jars filled with oddities like powdered unicorn horn and dried toad skins. You can almost smell the pungent mix of herb smoke and something faintly metallic that clings to the tools of this proto-scientific trade. Medicine in the late 16th and early 17th centuries was a mixture of trial error and more error and alchemy of hope and hubris. Elizabeth the Forester in her later years became a reluctant participant in these practices. Her health began to deteriorate in the final decade of her life, and her court physicians scrambled to find solutions for a monarch who had once exuded vitality but now seemed consumed by the weight of her years and her kingdom. You find her in Richmond Palace, her once mighty posture now stooped, her famously vibrant red wigs sitting uncomfortably atop a pale and drawn face. A mainstream fact often discussed is Elizabeth's reliance on the cosmetic lead-based concoction known as Venetian ceruse, a substance that helped achieve her iconic white mask look. It's no stretch to imagine that this very powder applied daily to maintain her royal image might have slowly poisoned her over the years. Lead poisoning can cause a range of symptoms, including fatigue, irritability, and cognitive decline. Imagine the irony: a queen who spent her reign protecting England from external threats may have fallen victim to one of her own, making courtesy of her mirror and brush. But the quirks of Elizabethan medicine don't stop there. One peculiar treatment employed in her era was the use of bezoar stone-like masses formed in the stomachs of goats believed to be a universal antidote to poison. There's no record of Elizabeth herself using bezoars, but they were highly prized, sometimes costing a small fortune. Physicians of the time also leaned heavily on bloodletting, convinced that draining bad blood could restore balance to the humors. You might wince at the thought of Elizabeth enduring such treatments, her frail arms subjected to cuts and lashes. Adding another layer of intrigue to her decline are fringe theories that suggest psychological causes. Elizabeth had ruled with a sharp mind and steely determination, yet by her final months, she reportedly refused to rest or take sustenance, standing for hours at a time as if fearing the consequences of lying down. Some historians speculate that guilt or depression may have plagued her, a queen haunted by the ghosts of her decisions. The execution of her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, and the deaths of her trusted advisors like Robert Dudley could have weighed heavily on her, compounding her physical ailments. And then there's the infamous ring, the secret token she supposedly wore until her death containing a portrait of her mother, Anne Boleyn. The ring is a poignant symbol of Elizabeth's identity and the trauma that marked her early life. It's tempting to imagine her clutching it in her final days, drawing some measure of comfort from the memory of her mother, whose legacy was as tragic as it was formative. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's death was caused by a single factor or a convergence of ailments. Was it blood poisoning from a tooth infection, as some suggest? Or did years of stress coupled with questionable medical practices simply wear her down? Theories abound, and each new generation of historians adds its interpretations, piecing together a puzzle that remains frustratingly incomplete. The eerie silence of Richmond Palace during those final weeks must have been unsettling. Courtiers whispered in corners, anxiously awaiting news while maintaining the facade of royal decorum. The Queen's refusal to name a successor added to the tension, creating a power vacuum that everyone feared but no one dared address openly. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Would Elizabeth recover? And if not, what would happen to England without its iconic Gloriana? As you walk through the dimly lit halls of her final days, you sense the weight of a life lived in relentless service to crown and country. Elizabeth's reign had been defined by spectacle, strategy, and survival. But her death was an intimate human affair, one woman confronting her mortality, surrounded by the trappings of power that now seemed powerless to save her. The scene fades, leaving you with the lingering realization that the causes of Elizabeth Ben's death remain as enigmatic as the Queen herself. The air shifts, and you now find yourself transported to the heart of court intrigue during Elizabeth Ben's final days. The Queen may have been declining, but the politics surrounding her throne were anything but lethargic. Her refusal to name a successor became the centerpiece of speculation anxiety. And let's be honest, a fair bit of backstabbing among her closest advisors. The Tudor dynasty hung by a thread, and the courtiers around her knew it. Picture this: a dimly lit room in Richmond Palace, the cold seeping through the stone walls. Courtiers cluster in whispers, their breaths visible in the chill. Some are calculating their chances of securing favor in a post-Elizabethan world, while others, genuinely loyal, are gripped with fear for England's future. Among them are some of the most influential figures of the era: Robert Cecil, the cunning and pragmatic Secretary of State, the Earl of Essex's former allies now trying to avoid further disgrace, and ambassadors from European powers, each with their own interest in the impending succession. Elizabeth's court was always a performance, and its players knew their roles well. But with the Queen's health failing, the script had gone awry. Robert Cecil, ever the strategist, had already begun secret communications with James VI of Scotland, the most likely candidate for the English throne. These covert letters were steeped in code and veiled assurances, a delicate dance to ensure a smooth transition of power without Elizabeth's explicit endorsement. You can almost feel Cecil's quill scratching against the parchment, each word carefully chosen to maintain plausible deniability. For Elizabeth, the question of naming a successor was fraught with danger. Naming James could alienate her Protestant allies who feared a return to Catholic rule, despite James's Protestant leanings. On the other hand, avoiding the question entirely risked chaos and potential civil war. It's easy to imagine the Queen, in one of her rare moments of vulnerability, agonizing over the decision, or perhaps resolutely ignoring it, in true Elizabethan fashion. And yet, despite the tension the court carried on with its peculiar blend of tradition and paranoia, meals were served with the usual pomp. Musicians played softly in the background, and courtiers attended to the Queen's every need, even as they cast sideways glances at each other, measuring alliances and rivalries. In many ways, this was the essence of Elizabeth's reign, a theater of control, where even in decline the queen managed to project an image of command, however tenuous it might have been. Historians often debate whether Elizabeth's refusal to name a successor was a calculated political move or a stubborn act of defiance. Was she protecting England from foreign influence, or was she simply unwilling to concede that her reign would ever end? Theories abound, and none seem to fully capture the complexity of a monarch who had spent decades mastering the art of ambiguity. As you wander through the corridors of speculation, consider the fringe theories surrounding this period. One such idea posits that Elizabeth was deliberately manipulated by her advisors to avoid naming a successor, allowing them to consolidate their own power in the interim. Another suggests that her silence was a form of protest against the inevitability of her mortality, a queen who had always been larger than life, refusing to face the ordinary fate that awaited her. In the meantime, James II of Scotland waited anxiously north of the border, his court abuzz with news of Elizabeth's condition. James was no stranger to intrigue, having survived multiple assassination attempts and political machinations throughout his reign in Scotland. His correspondence with Cecil reveals a man eager but cautious, determined to secure the English crown without alienating the powerful factions that would shape his rule. One quirky tidbit from this period involves the rumors of Elizabeth's death that circulated, prematurely sparking momentary chaos before being quickly quashed by the palace. Imagine the confusion and whispers spreading through London streets, merchants pausing mid-transaction to discuss whether the Queen had truly passed. The Tudor propaganda machine worked overtime to maintain the illusion of stability, even as the reality of the situation grew increasingly precarious. As you reflect on the dynamics of this transitional period, it's impossible not to marvel at the sheer audacity of the players involved. Cecil's secretive maneuvers, Elizabeth's enigmatic silence, and James's delicate balancing act all contributed to a moment in history that teetered on the edge of collapse, yet somehow managed to hold. And so the days turned into weeks, and the court continued its strange vigil. Outside Richmond Palace, the early stirrings of spring began to emerge, a cruel reminder of the renewal that awaited beyond Elizabeth's reign. Inside, the Queen remained a solitary figure, her world growing smaller as her influence faded. Yet even in her final moments, she held on to the dignity and mystique that had defined her rule, leaving her courtiers and historians alike to ponder the many layers of her legacy. The room grows quieter now, the air thick with the inevitability of Elizabeth's decline. You find yourself at the Queen's bedside, surrounded by her ladies-in-waiting and a few trusted advisors. Elizabethy once, the indomitable Gloriana, lies pale and unmoving, her breaths shallow. It's a strange scene, both intimate and distant. For decades, she had been the sun around which all of England orbited. And now even the sun sets. Elizabeth had always been fiercely independent. This was the woman who declared herself married to her kingdom, who had outmaneuvered suitors foreign and domestic, and defied the conventions of womanhood in the 16th century. Yet here she was frail and human, stripped of the majesty that had cloaked her for so long. Her ladies whisper to each other, exchanging worried glances. Every cough, every sigh becomes a portent. What makes this moment even more surreal is Elizabeth's refusal to take to her bed until the very end. For days she insisted on standing or sitting, leaning on cushions for support. When asked why she wouldn't lie down, she reportedly muttered something about not wanting to yield to death. It's an image that stays with you, this stubborn, regal figure resisting the inevitable as if sheer willpower could turn back time. As you watch, the room becomes a canvas for Elizabeth's memories. It's said that during these final days she sank into deep silences, punctuated by moments of lucidity where she would recall fragments of her life. You imagine her mind wandering through the great tapestry of her reign, the Armada's defeat, the glittering court of her younger years, the betrayals and triumphs that had defined her rule. It's a history lesson playing out in real time, though you suspect the audience here is more preoccupied with the future than the past. Robert Cecil, ever the strategist, hovers nearby. His face is a mask of concern, though you can almost see the gears turning behind his eyes. He knows that the Queen's death will unleash a tidal wave of uncertainty. He's prepared for it. Letters have already been sent, alliances quietly forged, but the weight of the moment is not lost on him. After all, he's about to witness the end of an era, one that his family had helped shape. The atmosphere in the palace is one of uneasy anticipation. Outside London is restless. News of the Queen's condition has started to seep through the tightly controlled walls of the court. Merchants, craftsmen, and common folk gather in taverns whispering about what comes next. The name James VI of Scotland is on many lips, but so are fears of unrest of a contested succession. For a nation that had experienced the chaos of civil war not so long ago, the prospect of instability is enough to send shivers down even the hardiest spine. Inside the Queen's chambers, a different kind of unrest brews. Elizabeth's ladies-in-waiting tend to her with a devotion born of years of service. But even they are not immune to the undercurrents of ambition swirling through the court. One of them leans over and whispers something to another, a trivial observation perhaps, or a veiled comment about the shifting dynamics. It's a reminder that even in death, the politics of the Tudor court remain very much alive. Amid this backdrop, you find yourself reflecting on the peculiar details of Elizabeth's final days. For instance, there's the curious choice of diet. It's said that as her health waned, the Queen consumed very little, surviving on small portions of broth or wine. Some accounts even claim that she refused food altogether in her last days, as if she were deliberately hastening her end. Historians still debate whether this was a conscious decision or simply the result of her failing body. Either way, it adds a layer of poignancy to an already tragic scene. Another detail that lingers is Elizabeth's reluctance to be alone. Despite her occasional silences, she seemed to draw comfort from the presence of her attendants, even if she rarely spoke to them. You imagine the quiet moments in her chamber, the soft rustle of fabric as her ladies moved about, the muted sounds of the palace beyond. It's a stark contrast to the noise and activity that had defined her court in its heyday. As the hours stretch into days, the Queen's condition worsens. Her once vivid eyes grow dull, her voice, a weapon that had silenced parliaments and charmed ambassadors, becomes barely audible. And yet, even in this diminished state, there's an air of dignity about her. She may be frail, but she is still Elizabeth, still the monarch who had defied expectations and shaped an era. At some point, a clergyman is called. Archbishop Whitgift, a figure who had served her faithfully for years, administers the final rites. It's a deeply symbolic moment, one that underscores the profound connection between the monarch and the Church of England. After all, Elizabeth's reign had been marked by religious upheaval, and her efforts to establish a Protestant identity for England had defined much of her legacy. As the prayers are read, you can't help but wonder if the Queen in her heart of hearts felt at peace with her decisions, or if doubt lingered even now. There's a moment of quiet when it happens. No grand declarations, no dramatic final words. Elizabeth simply slips away her breaths, slowing until they stop altogether. The room falls still, the weight of her absence settling over everyone present. It's a strange mix of sorrow and relief sorrow for the loss of a monarch who had become an institution, relief that the uncertainty of her decline has finally ended. And then, almost immediately, the wheels of history begin to turn. Cecil steps forward, his expression unreadable. The courtiers exchange glances, their grief mingling with the dawning realization that they are now part of something new. The Tudor dynasty, which had begun with such promise under Henry VII, has come to an end. The era of the Stuarts is about to begin. Outside, the first light of dawn breaks over Richmond Palace. The city, unaware of what has just transpired, continues its restless stirrings. For the people of England, the news will come soon enough. For now, the palace remains a world unto itself, caught in the liminal space between an ending and a beginning. As you leave the scene, you carry with you the echoes of Elizabeth's final days, the quiet defiance, the unresolved questions, the enduring mystique. She may be gone, but her story is far from over. In many ways, it's only just beginning. The world beyond Elizabeth's chambers begins to stir as news of her passing spreads. At first, it's just whispers carried by the palace staff, hushed exchanges in shadowed corridors. But like a stone tossed into a still pond, the ripples grow wider and more insistent. You can almost hear the invisible messenger sprinting toward London, the urgency of their steps echoing through the dawn. By the time the city wakes, the word is out. The Queen is dead. It's a phrase that, despite its simplicity, carries the weight of an epic. Merchants pause mid-bargain, their coins momentarily forgotten. In alehouses and marketplaces, the conversation turns not to the weather or the price of grain, but to the future. For the people of England, the death of Elizabeth I isn't just the end of a monarch. It's the close of an age defined by triumphs, terrors, and transformations. At court, the immediate concern is the succession. Despite Elizabeth's reluctance to name an heir, the groundwork has already been laid. Robert Cecil's deft political maneuvering ensures a relatively smooth transition, though the process is anything but simple. Letters are dispatched, emissaries sent to Scotland to secure James the Lysing's ascension. As the machinery of state grinds into motion, you're struck by the contrast between its efficiency and the chaos brewing in the hearts of those it governs. James VI of Scotland, now James I of England, receives the news with a mix of satisfaction and solemnity. You imagine him sitting in Holyrood Palace, the letter from Cecil trembling in his hands. For years he had anticipated this moment, his claim to the English throne a point of pride and frustration in equal measure. Now, as the crown inches closer, he must grapple with the enormity of what lies ahead. Uniting two kingdoms, navigating the treacherous waters of English politics, it's a task as daunting as it is exhilarating. The people, meanwhile, are left to process their grief. Elizabeth had been a paradox, both a distant sovereign and a deeply personal presence in their lives. For decades, her image had been inescapable, emblazoned on coins, portraits, and proclamations. She was the Virgin Queen, the Protestant champion, the embodiment of English resilience. To lose her feels like losing a part of the nation's soul. Yet, not everyone mourns. In Catholic circles, there's a subdued sense of hope. Elizabeth's reign, while marked by relative stability, had been harsh for those who clung to the old faith. The recusancy finds the executions of priests, the unyielding insistence on Protestant conformity. It had created a divide that many hoped James, with his Scottish pragmatism, might bridge. Of course, such hopes would prove largely unfounded. But for now they burn quietly in the background, a flicker of possibility in a sea of uncertainty. As the days unfold, preparations for Elizabeth's funeral begin. It will be a grand affair, as befits a monarch of her stature. The streets of London are scrubbed clean, banners hung from windows, the air thick with anticipation. You can almost see the procession winding its way through the city, a river of black-clad mourners flowing toward Westminster Abbey. But the funeral is not just a moment of collective grief. It's a spectacle of power and continuity. Every step of the procession, every note of the requiem is designed to remind the people that the monarchy endures. Elizabeth may be gone, but the crown persists its authority unbroken. It's a lesson reinforced by the sight of James's emissaries mingling with Elizabeth's courtiers, the seamless transition from one dynasty to the next on full display. In the quieter corners of England, away from the pomp and ceremony of the capital life, goes on much as it always has. Farmers tend to their fields, blacksmiths hammer away in their forges, children play in the muddy lanes of their villages. For them, the death of a queen is a distant event, its immediate impact overshadowed by the demands of daily survival. Yet even here the ripples of change are felt. The Elizabethan era, with its distinctive flavor of ambition and anxiety, is giving way to something new, a world shaped not by the Tudor queen, but by her Scottish successor. As you reflect on all this, one question lingers. What would Elizabeth think of her legacy? It's a question that historians have pondered for centuries, and the answers are as varied as the woman herself. Some argue that she would take pride in her accomplishments, the defeat of the Armada, the flourishing of the arts, the consolidation of Protestant England. Others suggest she might harbor regrets, particularly regarding her treatment of Mary Queen of Scots, or her failure to secure a lasting peace with Spain. Then there's the matter of her personal life. Elizabeth had always been a private person, her emotions carefully guarded behind a facade of regal composure. Yet her letters, her actions, and even her silences reveal glimpses of the woman beneath the crown. Would she in her final moments have thought of Robert Dudley, the great love of her life? Or of the children she never had, the family she never built? These are questions without answers, mysteries that add to the enduring allure of her story. As you imagine her lying in state, her body encased in a coffin of lead, and her face veiled by the shadows of candlelight, you're struck by the dichotomy of Elizabeth's existence. She was both a symbol and a person, her life, a delicate balancing act between public duty and private desire. And now, in death, she belongs to history, a figure at once revered and scrutinized, her every decision dissected, her every action immortalized. The wind howls softly outside, carrying with it the scent of change. Elizabeth is gone, but her spirit lingers woven into the fabric of the nation she ruled. It's a comforting thought, one that suggests that even in the face of mortality, some things endure. And as you prepare to leave this chapter behind, you find yourself wondering what stories the future will tell about the present, what legacies will be left by the leaders of today. The answer, of course, lies in the hands of time. For now, all you can do is take a deep breath, close your eyes, and let the echoes of Elizabeth's reign lull you into a quiet, contemplative sleep. The world Elizabeth leaves behind is one of contrasts. England at the close of the 16th century is a nation on the cusp of transformation. Underneath the quiet surface of rural life and the bustling energy of its towns, there is a simmering tension. A tension born of ambition, uncertainty, and the lingering echoes of Elizabeth's rule. You find yourself walking through the streets of London, imagining the sights and sounds that must have filled the city in the days following the Queen's death. The cobbled roads are alive with activity, merchants hawking their wares, apprentices rushing to their masters' shops, street performers drawing small crowds with their tricks and tunes. Overhead, a pale winter sun casts a weak light on the grime-streaked walls of Tudor buildings, their timber frames leaning precariously into the narrow alleys. Amid this lively scene, the mourning for Elizabeth feels almost subdued. There are no wails of despair, no dramatic displays of grief. Instead, there's a quiet reverence, a sense of loss expressed in the small gestures of daily life. A shopkeeper sets out a black ribbon beside his wares. A woman pauses in her washing to murmur a prayer. A group of children reenacts the grand pageantry of the Queen's court, their laughter tinged with an understanding beyond their years. As you wander further, you come across a group of men engaged in a spirited debate. They're gathered outside an alehouse, their voices rising and falling with the rhythm of argument. The topic, Elizabeth's legacy. One man, his face flushed with drink and conviction, proclaims her the greatest monarch England has ever known. Another, older and wearier, shakes his head, muttering about the wars, the taxes, and the burdens placed on the common folk. Historians may still argue whether Elizabeth's reign was a golden age or a gilded cage, but here in this moment the debate feels raw and immediate. Beyond the city, the countryside paints a different picture. The rolling hills and fertile valleys of England remain largely untouched by the machinations of court politics. Here life continues much as it has for centuries. Farmers till the soil, shepherds tend their flocks, and families gather by the hearth to share stories and meals. Yet even in this bucolic setting, the shadow of Elizabeth's death looms. The news spreads slowly, carried by traveling merchants, wandering minstrels, and the occasional letter. By the time it reaches the farthest corners of the realm, it's often accompanied by rumors and embellishments, tales of poisoned rings, spectral apparitions, and whispered conspiracies. In these rural communities, Elizabeth's memory takes on a life of its own. To some, she is the benevolent mother of the nation, her image as enduring as the coins that bear her likeness. To others, she is a distant figure, more myth than reality. Her reign a tapestry of triumphs and tragedies woven into the fabric of their lives. You imagine an old farmer sitting by his fire recounting the story of the Spanish Armada to his grandchildren. His voice rises with excitement as he describes the storm that scattered the enemy fleet, his eyes shining with pride. For him, Elizabeth's England is not just a chapter in history, but a part of his identity, a reminder of the strength and resilience that define his people. Meanwhile, in the corridors of power, preparations for James's arrival are in full swing. The court, ever a hive of intrigue, buzzes with anticipation and anxiety. You can almost hear the whispers as courtiers jockey for position, eager to secure favor with the new king. Will James reward loyalty to Elizabeth? Or will he favor those who supported his claim? The uncertainty is palpable, a reminder that in the world of politics, alliances are as fragile as the thin ice of a winter pond. And then there's the matter of religion. Under Elizabeth, England had walked a tightrope balancing Protestant orthodoxy with a grudging tolerance for dissent. James, with his own complex relationship with faith, is an unknown quantity. Some hope he will bring a more inclusive approach, bridging the divide between Catholics and Protestants. Others fear he will exacerbate the tensions, his policies stoking the fires of division rather than quelling them. The question of religion is not just a matter of doctrine. It's a battle for the soul of the nation, a struggle that will define the coming era. As the days turn to weeks, the memory of Elizabeth begins to fade, replaced by the pressing concerns of the present. Yet her legacy endures in ways both obvious and subtle. The theaters of London, where Shakespeare's plays continue to captivate audiences, owe much to her patronage. The ships that sail from English ports venturing to the New World in search of fortune and glory carry the spirit of exploration she championed. Even the language itself bears the imprint of her reign, the rich cadences of Elizabethan English echoing in the poetry and prose of the age. And then there are the personal legacies, the lives touched, changed, and shaped by Elizabeth's rule. You think of the women who saw in her a model of strength and independence, her defiance of convention and inspiration to chart their own paths. You think of the statesmen who learned the art of diplomacy in her court, their skills honed by her keen intellect and unyielding will. You think of the countless ordinary people who, in their own small ways, contributed to the tapestry of her reign, their stories woven into the larger narrative of a queen and her country. As you reflect on all this, you're struck by the realization that history is never just about the past. It's a mirror, a lens, a conversation between what was and what is. Elizabeth may be gone, but her story continues to resonate, its themes of power, ambition, and identity as relevant today as they were 4 centuries ago. And as you prepare to leave this chapter behind, you find yourself wondering what future generations will make of it all. What lessons they will draw from the life and death of a queen who defied the odds and changed the course of history. For now, though, it's time to rest. Let the echoes of Elizabeth's England fade into the quiet hum of the present, the weight of the past giving way to the promise of a new day. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the story carry you into a peaceful, dream-filled sleep. The transition from Elizabeth to James is a study in contrasts. Where Elizabeth ruled with a blend of regal charisma and calculated restraint, James brings a new style to the throne, one that reflects his upbringing and the unique challenges of uniting two crowns under a single monarch. You can almost feel the shift as England adjusts to this new era, the old rhythms disrupted by fresh perspectives and priorities. You picture James entering London for the first time as king. The procession is grand, the streets lined with cheering crowds eager to catch a glimpse of their new ruler. James, dressed in fine silks and jewels, cuts a striking figure, though his demeanor lacks the theatrical flair that defined Elizabeth's public appearances. He is a scholar at heart, more comfortable with books and debates than with the spectacle of royal pageantry. Still, he understands the importance of this moment, the need to establish his authority and reassure a nation uncertain of what lies ahead. As the days pass, James begins to put his stamp on the kingdom. His court, though not without its share of intrigue, is a more subdued affair compared to Elizabeth's. The Queen's vibrant circle of poets, playwrights, and adventurers gives way to a quieter, more introspective atmosphere. You imagine the corridors of power filled with the murmur of intellectual discourse, the debates over philosophy and theology reflecting James's own preoccupations. Yet, even as James seeks to project an image of stability and wisdom, challenges loom on the horizon. The union of England and Scotland is not without its complications. While James envisions a harmonious Great Britain, the reality is far messier. The cultural and political differences between the two nations run deep, and resistance to the idea of unity is strong. You can sense the tension as James navigates this delicate balancing act. His efforts to bridge the divide often met with skepticism and hostility. Religious tensions too persist. Under Elizabeth, the Church of England had walked a careful line seeking to maintain a semblance of unity in a fractured religious landscape. James, however, faces mounting pressure from both Puritans and Catholics, each demanding greater recognition and accommodation. Historians still argue whether James's approach to religion was pragmatic or overly cautious. But what's clear is that his reign is marked by a series of compromises that satisfy few and alienate many. Meanwhile, the people of England continue to grapple with the changes brought about by Elizabeth's long reign. The economy shaped by the growth of trade and the beginnings of empire is both a source of opportunity and a cause of anxiety. You picture a merchant in London's bustling markets, his fortunes tied to the ebb and flow of commerce, his hopes and fears mirrored in the faces of his fellow traders. For every success story, there are tales of ruin, the precarious nature of this new economic order, a reminder of the risks inherent in progress. In the countryside, the enclosure of common lands is transforming rural life. The fields that once supported subsistence farming are now being fenced off for more profitable uses, displacing countless families in the process. You imagine a young farmer, his livelihood threatened by the loss of his land, his future uncertain as he contemplates a move to the city or even the New World. The social fabric of England is being reshaped, the old ways giving way to new realities that promise both hope and hardship. Through it all, Elizabeth's legacy looms large. Her reign with its triumphs and tribulations serves as a benchmark against which James is measured. You can almost hear the whispers in the taverns and alehouses, the comparisons inevitable as people assess the new king's performance. Some praise James for his intellect and vision, while others long for the days of Elizabeth's charismatic leadership. The weight of her shadow is a constant presence, a reminder of the enduring impact of her rule. And yet life goes on. The theaters of London continue to thrive, their stages alive with the works of Shakespeare and his contemporaries. The ships that Elizabeth sent to explore and conquer new lands are now part of a larger imperial enterprise, their voyages laying the groundwork for England's global ambitions. The culture, the economy, the very identity of the nation are evolving, shaped by the forces set in motion during the Queen's reign. As you reflect on all this, you're struck by the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the uncertainties and challenges of the time, people find ways to adapt, to persevere, to thrive. Whether it's the merchant navigating the complexities of trade, the farmer adjusting to the loss of his land, or the playwright capturing the essence of the age in his works, there is a sense of determination that defines this period. It's a reminder that history is not just about the actions of kings and queens, but about the countless individuals who in their own ways contribute to the story of a nation. And so, as England moves forward under James's rule, the memory of Elizabeth remains a guiding star. Her life and legacy, with all their contradictions and complexities, continue to inspire and challenge those who follow in her footsteps. It's a testament to the enduring power of history, a reminder that even in the midst of change, the past is never truly gone. It lives on in the stories we tell, the lessons we learn, and the dreams we dare to pursue. The court of James I introduces a shift in the tone of governance and the rhythm of life at court. You imagine walking through the corridors of the royal palace, the echoes of Elizabeth's dazzling court replaced with something quieter, more reflective, but not without its own intrigue. James, more at ease with intellectual debates than public spectacles, fosters a culture that emphasizes knowledge, yet it's not immune to scandal or excess. One of James's defining projects is the commissioning of the King James Bible. You picture the team of scholars and theologians poring over ancient texts by candlelight, debating each word with fervor. This translation, intended to unify the religious factions of his kingdom, is a monumental achievement. Historians still debate its impact, but its enduring legacy as a literary masterpiece and a cornerstone of Protestant faith is undeniable. Yet even as James seeks to unite his realm through Scripture, the cracks in the religious landscape widen. The gunpowder plot of 1605 is a chilling reminder of the deep-seated tensions that simmer beneath the surface. You imagine the conspirators, their whispered plans taking shape in dimly lit rooms, their motivations driven by a mix of desperation and fervor. The discovery of their plot sends shockwaves through the kingdom, reinforcing James's fears of Catholic dissent and leading to a wave of repression. It's a tense and uncertain time with trust in short supply. In the countryside, life for the common folk continues much as it has for generations, though changes are afoot. The process of enclosure accelerates, reshaping the rural landscape and displacing many small farmers. You can almost feel the weight of their struggle as they adapt to a world where communal land is increasingly privatized. Some find new opportunities in the burgeoning towns and cities, while others face hardship and uncertainty. The cities themselves are growing, their bustling streets alive with commerce and creativity. London in particular is a hive of activity. You imagine the throngs of people navigating its narrow, winding lanes, the air filled with the sounds of haggling merchants and the clatter of horse-drawn carts. The theaters continue to draw crowds, the works of playwrights like Ben Jonson, and the later plays of Shakespeare offering a mirror to the complexities of the age. The city is a place of both opportunity and danger, its growth bringing prosperity to some and squalor to others. At court, James's penchant for favoritism becomes a source of contention. His close relationships with young male courtiers, most notably Robert Carr and George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham, fuel rumors and resentment. You can sense the undercurrents of jealousy and ambition, the rivalries that play out in whispered conversations and calculated moves. While James values loyalty and intellect in his favorites, their influence often leads to political missteps and corruption, further eroding his reputation. Meanwhile, abroad, the seeds of empire are being sown. The Virginia Company, chartered by James in 1606, establishes Jamestown, the first permanent English colony in the New World. You picture the settlers, their faces etched with determination and weariness, carving out a new life in an unfamiliar and often hostile environment. The challenges they face, disease, conflict with indigenous peoples, and harsh winters are immense, but their perseverance lays the foundation for what will become a global empire. Back home, scientific inquiry begins to flourish. Figures like Francis Bacon advocate for a new approach to understanding the natural world, emphasizing observation and experimentation over reliance on classical texts. You imagine Bacon hunched over his manuscripts, his mind teeming with ideas that challenge conventional wisdom. It's a time of intellectual ferment, the beginnings of a revolution in thought that will reshape how humanity understands its place in the universe. Yet for all the progress and change, the specter of Elizabeth lingers. Her memory is invoked in comparisons to James, both flattering and critical. You can almost hear the murmurs of courtiers and commoners alike debating the merits of the new king against the towering legacy of the queen who reigned before him. It's a testament to Elizabeth's enduring influence that her shadow looms so large even as the kingdom moves forward. And so life in the early 17th century is a tapestry of continuity and change. The traditions of the past coexist with the innovations of the present, creating a world that is both familiar and new. The challenges are many, but so too are the opportunities as England navigates this pivotal moment in its history. Through it all, the resilience of its people shines through their stories, a reminder of the enduring strength of the human spirit. As the years pass, you watch England's trajectory shift under James I's steady, if somewhat uninspiring hand. The transition from Elizabeth's dramatic flair to James's quieter, more methodical rule is palpable. The kingdom, once united in admiration for a queen who deftly embodied both power and femininity, now adjusts to a king whose strengths lie in scholarship and diplomacy rather than charisma. One area where James excels is his approach to international relations. You can imagine him seated at a desk, his hand hovering over parchment as he deliberates over letters to foreign courts. He works to avoid costly wars, preferring negotiation to battle. The marriage of his daughter Princess Elizabeth to Frederick V of the Palatinate is a diplomatic triumph. The lavish wedding celebrations are a brief moment of splendor in his reign, a reminder of Elizabethan grandeur. Yet this alliance pulls England into the religious conflicts of Europe, eventually contributing to the 30 Years' War. Historians still argue whether this decision was a shrewd move for Protestant solidarity or a misstep that entangled England in unnecessary strife. Back in England, James's efforts to strengthen royal finances are met with resistance. Parliament, emboldened by the growing power of the landed gentry, clashes with the king over taxation and royal prerogative. You can almost hear the debates echoing through Westminster Hall, the air charged with tension. James's belief in the divine right of kings, while unwavering, is increasingly out of step with the rising tide of parliamentary authority. This friction sets the stage for the constitutional conflicts that will define the 17th century. In the countryside, the enclosure movement gathers momentum, transforming rural England. You picture vast tracts of land, once shared by communities, now fenced off and privatized. The idyllic vision of medieval England gives way to a more modern capitalist economy, but the cost is steep for the displaced farmers who lose their livelihoods. Some turn to vagrancy, wandering the roads in search of work, while others migrate to growing towns and cities, contributing to the urban population boom. London in particular thrives as a cultural and economic hub. You imagine the bustling markets, the River Thames teeming with ships bearing goods from across the globe. The East India Company, established in 1600, grows and influences its trading ventures, laying the groundwork for British colonial expansion. The city is a melting pot of people, ideas, and opportunities, though it's also rife with disease and poverty. The contrast between the wealth of the merchant class and the struggles of the poor is stark, a microcosm of the inequalities that persist throughout the kingdom. Meanwhile, at court, James's favoritism continues to breed discontent. The rise of George Villiers, later the Duke of Buckingham, is a case in point. Villiers' charm and ambition earn him the king's favor, but his rapid ascent provokes envy and resentment among other courtiers. You imagine the whispered conversations, the thinly veiled insults exchanged during formal gatherings. Buckingham's influence extends beyond courtly intrigues. He plays a key role in foreign and domestic policy, often with controversial results. Religious tensions, too, remain a constant undercurrent. The Puritans, dissatisfied with James's moderate Protestantism, push for further reforms within the Church of England. You picture their austere congregations, their prayers filled with fervor and determination. Yet James resists their demands, preferring to maintain a middle ground. His attempts to placate both Catholics and Protestants often please neither, leaving the kingdom divided along religious lines. Amid these challenges, the arts continue to flourish. The Jacobean era sees the flowering of literature, drama, and architecture. You imagine attending a performance at the Globe Theatre, the audience rapt, as actors bring to life the works of Shakespeare, Jonson, and their contemporaries. The richness of this cultural legacy offers a counterpoint to the political and social upheavals of the time, a reminder of the enduring power of human creativity. As James's reign progresses, his health begins to decline. You picture the king, his once robust figure now frail, his movements slower, his thoughts perhaps clouded by age and ailments. The court grows quieter, the vibrancy of earlier years fading. Yet James remains committed to his vision for England, his scholarly pursuits providing solace as he navigates the twilight of his reign. In these final years, the memory of Elizabeth I remains a potent presence. Her name is invoked in discussions of leadership and legacy, her reign a benchmark against which James's is measured. The comparison is not always favorable, but it speaks to the enduring impact of her rule. Even as England moves forward, the echoes of the Elizabethan era linger, a testament to the indelible mark she left on her kingdom. And so the reign of James I, with all its complexities and contradictions, draws to a close. It's a time of transition, a bridge between the grandeur of Elizabeth's court and the turbulence that lies ahead. Through it all, the resilience and adaptability of the English people shine, their stories woven into the rich tapestry of history. The year is 1625, and James I has passed, leaving the throne to his son Charles I. You picture the young king, his demeanor reserved, stepping into the shoes of his father, aware of the weight of expectations and the challenges that lie ahead. Charles inherits a kingdom fraught with tension between crown and parliament Catholics and Protestants, and the elite and the common people. As you observe Charles, you notice his air of determination, though some might mistake it for stubbornness. Unlike his father, who was willing to compromise when necessary, Charles is resolute in his belief in the divine right of kings. You imagine him addressing Parliament, his voice steady but firm, asserting his authority in a tone that brooks no dissent. Yet his uncompromising stance only deepens the rift with a Parliament increasingly insistent on limiting royal power. The early years of Charles's reign are marked by financial struggles. To fund his government and military campaigns, he resorts to controversial measures such as forced loans and the billeting of troops in private homes. You picture the outrage of the gentry and commoners alike, their grievances simmering as they see their rights infringed. The Petition of Right presented to Charles in 1628 encapsulates their demands for the protection of civil liberties and the rule of law. Though Charles reluctantly agrees to it, his actions suggest otherwise fueling distrust among his subjects. Meanwhile, religious tensions continue to escalate. Charles's marriage to Henrietta Maria, a Catholic French princess, raises eyebrows and suspicions among his Protestant subjects. You can almost hear the whispers in taverns and marketplaces, the rumors that the Queen is exerting undue influence on the king, steering him toward Catholic sympathies. Charles's support for Archbishop Laud's high church policies further alienates Puritans who view these measures as a step toward Catholicism. In Scotland, resistance to Charles's religious reforms ignites conflict. You imagine the signing of the National Covenant in 1638, a powerful declaration of Scottish opposition to the king's attempts to impose a new prayer book and church hierarchy. This defiance leads to the bishops' wars, a costly and humiliating episode for Charles that weakens his authority and drains his treasury. As you walk the streets of London in the 1630s, the atmosphere feels heavy with unease. The divide between the crown and its subjects widens, and the sense of foreboding grows. Charles's decision to rule without parliament for 11 years, what historians call the personal rule, further isolates him. Though he attempts to govern efficiently and reform the administration, his methods are seen as autocratic. You can picture the Star Chamber, its proceedings secretive and severe, a symbol of royal overreach in the eyes of many. Yet amid this turmoil, life goes on. You imagine bustling markets, artisans at work, and the hum of daily life in the growing towns and cities. The population of England continues to rise, and with it the demand for goods and services. The economy expands, driven by trade and industry, but the benefits are unevenly distributed. Wealthy merchants and landowners prosper while the poor struggle to make ends meet. In the countryside, the enclosure movement accelerates, transforming the landscape and displacing rural communities. You picture vast fields enclosed by hedgerows, the open commons a distant memory. For many, the promise of opportunity in the city outweighs the hardships of rural life, leading to increased urbanization. The bustling ports of Bristol and Liverpool, along with London's ever-expanding docks, reflect England's growing role in global trade. Through it all, the arts and sciences continue to flourish. You imagine a playwright penning the lines of a new drama, a composer crafting melodies for a court masque, or a natural philosopher conducting experiments in a makeshift laboratory. These pursuits offer a counterpoint to the political and social unrest, a reminder of the creativity and ingenuity that define the human spirit. As the 1630s give way to the 1640s, the tensions that have been simmering for decades begin to boil over. The short Parliament of 1640 and the subsequent Long Parliament signal a shift in the balance of power. You can almost hear the heated debates in Westminster, the clash of voices as MPs push back against royal authority. Charles's attempt to arrest 5 members of Parliament in January 1642 is a turning point, a moment that cements his reputation as a tyrant in the eyes of many. The country edges closer to civil war, the lines between royalists and parliamentarians becoming increasingly defined. Families are divided, neighbors turned against each other as England braces for the conflict that will shape its future. You feel the weight of history pressing down the sense that a reckoning is at hand as the kingdom stands on the brink of a seismic transformation. You step deeper into the early 1600s, where the promise of a new era clashes with the realities of an aging monarch and a kingdom simmering with tension. James IV, now well into his reign, faces mounting challenges that ripple through the fabric of society. The court buzzes with gossip about his health and temperament, while the common folk go about their daily struggles, often unaware of the political storms gathering overhead. One of the most gripping developments of this time is the rise of the so-called addled Parliament of 1614. You picture the grand hall filled with well-dressed nobles and weary commoners alike, attempting to navigate the increasingly fractious politics of the day. This parliament earns its nickname for accomplishing almost nothing, a frustrating stalemate, where neither king nor lawmakers can bridge their deepening divides. Historians still argue whether this deadlock was due to James's stubbornness or the parliament's inflexibility, but the result weakens royal authority and sows seeds of discontent. Meanwhile, religious tensions continue to roil beneath the surface. The gunpowder plot may have been foiled a decade earlier, but anti-Catholic sentiment remains fierce. You can almost hear the whispered fears in taverns and market squares, the suspicions aimed at anyone who might harbor secret loyalties. Yet at the same time, there's a quieter movement among some English Protestants pushing for more radical reforms, seeking to purify the Church of England from what they see as lingering Catholic practices. This push, known as Puritanism, begins to shape not just religion, but politics, education, and even social life. In the shadow of these tensions, England's colonial ambitions keep growing. The Jamestown settlement struggles on, buffeted by famine, disease, and uneasy relations with Native American tribes. You imagine the rough wooden houses, the desperate faces of settlers battling the elements, and the relentless hope that drives them onward. These early colonial efforts, though fraught with hardship, plant the seeds for a future empire that will stretch across continents. Back on the streets of London, the city grows ever larger and more chaotic. You can almost feel the mix of excitement and danger as merchants, artisans, and beggars mingle in the narrow alleys. The plague looms as an ever-present threat, flaring up in waves that sweep through the population. Some turn to folk remedies and superstitions, while others embrace the emerging scientific methods promoted by thinkers like Francis Bacon. This period is a delicate dance between old beliefs and new knowledge, with every cough or fever stirring anxiety. At court, James's personal life continues to spark controversy. His favoritism toward George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham, causes resentment among nobles who see the young favorite as arrogant and self-serving. You can almost hear the whispered intrigues, the careful plotting, as factions jockey for influence. This favoritism is more than personal preference. It shapes the very policies of the kingdom, sometimes to disastrous effect. Despite the turmoil, the arts flourish. The theaters are alive with new plays that both entertain and challenge audiences. Shakespeare's later works, alongside those of contemporaries like John Webster and Ben Jonson, reflect the anxieties and complexities of the age. You can almost hear the applause and gasps from crowded playhouses, the mix of high culture and bawdy humor that defines this golden era of English drama. Amid all this, James's health begins to decline. The once vigorous king now battles ailments that sap his strength and test his resolve. The court grows tense as whispers of succession plans and political uncertainty circulate. Historians still debate the exact causes of his decline, with theories ranging from obesity and gout to more exotic possibilities like porphyria or mercury poisoning from medical treatments. Whatever the cause, the end of his reign approaches, bringing with it a sense of both loss and anticipation. You feel the weight of this moment, the twilight of a king who shaped a kingdom in his image with all his flaws and virtues laid bare. The stage is set for the next act in England's unfolding drama, one that will see the rise of new conflicts, new heroes, and new tragedies. For now, you take a breath and listen to the echoes of a world in transition, where the past and future collide in restless harmony. You find yourself stepping into the uneasy calm that follows the tempest of the English Civil War. The monarchy has fallen, and the once unthinkable has become reality. England is now a republic known as the Commonwealth. Oliver Cromwell stands at the helm, a man whose face you've seen in countless portraits, stern, resolute, the embodiment of a nation in flux. But life for the average person, it's anything but simple or peaceful. Picture the streets and farms under Cromwell's rule. No royal pomp, no king's court to mask the daily grind. Instead, there's a strict moral code enforced by Puritan values. You might chuckle at the idea of dancing being banned or theaters shuttered, but for the people, then this was serious business. Even coffee houses, which might seem like innocent places for gossip, were hotbeds of political and religious fervor and not always safe spaces. This period sees a push to clean up society. You imagine townspeople policing one another, neighbors snitching over something as trivial as a Sunday spent without church, or a tavern that served ale past curfew. The Puritan regime's crackdown on sin is legendary. No Christmas celebrations, no merrymaking, and a whole lot of praying. You can almost hear the groans of those who just wanted to enjoy a simple holiday feast. Yet, beneath the austere surface, life for many was about survival and adaptation. Farmers still planted and harvested, merchants still traded, and children still played, albeit under watchful eyes. The economy wobbled but didn't collapse. You picture markets bustling, maybe a little quieter than before, but alive with the hum of daily business. Cromwell's military campaigns continued, notably the brutal conquest of Ireland and parts of Scotland. You imagine the tension as news of these distant battles trickled back home, the sense of an empire stretching its reach, but also sowing resentment. These campaigns were ruthless, and historians still argue whether Cromwell's actions in Ireland should be seen as necessary or as atrocities. Meanwhile, the intellectual and scientific life of England doesn't grind to a halt. Thinkers and inventors keep pushing boundaries. This is the era of early experiments with telescopes and microscopes of new ideas taking root in philosophy and politics. The paradox of a strict religious regime fostering some of the seeds of modern science is one of history's quirkiest contrasts. The political landscape remains volatile. You can almost feel the undercurrents of discontent as Cromwell dissolves the Rump Parliament and later rules as Lord Protector, a title that sounds like a fancy upgrade from king, but with fewer perks and more enemies. People whisper debate and sometimes rebel, uncertain whether this new order is truly better than the monarchy they once despised. Despite the harshness, there are glimpses of cultural life pushing back. Underground theater groups, secret celebrations, and a quiet yearning for normalcy bubble beneath the surface. You can almost taste the forbidden joy in a stolen moment of song or dance, a flicker of rebellion against the rigidity imposed from above. As Cromwell's health fails and the political machine grinds, England stands at a crossroads. The kingless experiment hangs by a thread, and the old royalists bide their time in exile, dreaming of restoration. You get the sense that the people are exhausted, weary of war, puritanism and uncertainty, craving stability even if that means welcoming back a monarch. Historians still debate whether the Commonwealth was a noble attempt at republicanism or merely a military dictatorship in disguise. Was Cromwell a visionary or a tyrant? The truth, as always, sits somewhere in the middle, caught between the ideals of liberty and the realities of power. As you slowly step back from this turbulent chapter, you feel the weight of history settling around you. The hopes dashed, the lives altered, and the stage set for the next great act in England's long story. You're now drifting toward the final moments of this long, winding story, the restoration of the monarchy. After Cromwell's death, England's political landscape feels like a boat lost at sea, tossed by storms of uncertainty and power struggles. You can almost hear the whispers in the taverns and market squares. When will the king return? The royalists who'd been scattered and silenced are quietly plotting and hoping. Imagine yourself walking the streets of London in 1660. The air carries a mix of relief, excitement, and a pinch of anxiety. King Charles II steps onto the stage, officially restored to the throne. The restoration isn't just a political event, it's a cultural tidal wave. Theaters reopen, people throw elaborate parties, and the once banned Christmas carols fill the air. The famous Merry Monarch brings a breath of fresh, if sometimes reckless, air after years of Puritan gloom. Life begins to feel a bit more festive, at least on the surface. You picture people indulging in once forbidden pleasures, coffee houses buzzing with chatter poetry readings and extravagant masquerade balls. Yet this newfound freedom comes with its own complications. Charles II's reign is marked by scandals, political intrigue, and a court famous for its excesses and charm. It's a sharp contrast to Cromwell's sobriety, and not everyone's thrilled. On the everyday level, ordinary folks deal with the aftermath of decades of upheaval, rebuilding communities, reclaiming lands, and re-establishing social norms. Farming, trade, and daily routines settle into a new rhythm, but the scars of civil war don't fade overnight. You can almost see the weary eyes of parents teaching their children about loyalty and survival in a world that's constantly shifting beneath their feet. This era also sparks advances in science and philosophy. Thinkers like John Locke start to question the nature of government and writes, planting seeds for ideas that will eventually reshape the modern world. The tension between monarchy and emerging democratic ideas simmers quietly in the background, a reminder that history never really rests. You might chuckle at the odd quirks of Restoration England, like the first known coffeehouse scandal, involving political conspiracies brewed stronger than the coffee, or the bizarre fashion trends that had people looking like walking peacocks. There's even talk of secret societies meeting under candlelight, plotting futures both noble and nefarious. Historians still debate the extent to which the Restoration truly healed England, or merely papered over the cracks. Was it a return to normalcy or the start of a new cycle of political games? That question lingers like a shadow, inviting endless discussion. As you slowly drift toward the close of this journey, you feel the immense tapestry of England's history, unfolding the triumphs, tragedies, and countless lives caught in between. The monarchy returns, but the story of power, people, and survival rolls on, inviting you to rest with the knowledge that history is never truly boring. It's the quiet hum beneath your dreams. As the story gently settles, imagine yourself lying back, the weight of centuries lifting from your shoulders. The flicker of candlelight fades softly, replaced by the calm hush of night. You've walked through centuries of turmoil, whispers of kings and rebels, fading into the quiet hum of peaceful breathing. There's something comforting in knowing these moments, though distant, connect us all, people grappling with power loss and hope. Your mind slows thoughts, meandering like a lazy river tracing the rise and fall of empires without urgency. The clash of swords, the roar of crowds, and the murmur of secret plots all dissolve into a soft, timeless stillness. Somewhere far away, a hearth's fire crackles, gently echoing the warmth, now spreading through you. You carry with you the echoes of resilience, the curious twists of fate, and the ever-turning wheel of history. Tonight the past is a lullaby, its stories cradling you as you drift deeper into rest. Wherever your dreams take you, may they be gentle, curious, and kind as the tapestry of human experience unfurls quietly in the background. I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.